Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on screen time effects. I see people joining us at 7 o'clock. I'm going to get started in just a second because, as usual, I have a lot to share, and running out of time is always a danger. So let me just check a setting or two and make sure we're good to go, and I'll share my screen and we will get rolling. Let me just check something. Okay, I think we should be in pretty good shape. So before I share my screen, welcome. I'm Dr. Trish Leigh. Tonight's webinar is on screen time effects. I aptly call it Save Your Child's Brain from Electronics because we as adults are in major risk of having our brain control taken over by our electronics and our screens also. So I'm really excited to be able to share this information with you. So if you haven't joined me on a webinar before, we have people on this webinar from all across the country because many different neurofeedback practitioners invite patients and prospective clients to join us on these webinars because it is my goal to teach people and inspire them and empower them to care about their brains. And I do that through many offices across the country. So welcome. So I won't be just talking about my office at Leigh Brain and Spine per se. It's more educational in nature, and I hope you enjoyed that and appreciate it. So let's get rolling. So save your child's brain from electronics. So we're going to talk about kids because, you know, kids really use a lot of electronics and spend a ton of time on screens. And if you don't know me personally, my husband, Dr. Cosmis Leigh, and I work together. We have 6 children. Yes, I said 6. So that is 6 brains that we are trying to regulate at all times, but also to create a healthy relationship to screens in this digital world. And that's where we're at. And I speak with people all the time in the office and through my seminars, and digital screen time is where relationships are at these days. So it's important to teach your kids to balance the way that they use their screens. And I'm going to show you why right now. Okay, so how do screens affect our lives? I am quickly going to show you a slide on each one of these things. And I promise it'll be brief, but I want you to understand what screens are actually doing to our brains and to our lives. Then I'm going to show you what you can do to reverse screen time effects. If you ever have a question, there's a Q&A box that you can put your question into the box, and I'll see it pop up. And I usually save questions till the end just so we can move through the content and I don't, lose people because I'm answering a question at length. So I'll save that to the end, and we'll move through this presentation in a timely fashion, and I'll get to questions at the end. So if you think of something, put it into the box because I will look at it and I'll answer it. It'll be fun, and it becomes, a little bit interactive when we do that. Okay, number 1, and actually this was at the bottom of my slides. I just switched it to the top, is sleep problems. I want to explain to you what screens do to sleep, because I really believe that screens are wreaking havoc on the sleep habits and the sleep cycle across the country and the globe, and I'm going to share that with you. Anxiety is through the roof, and screens are directly related to it, and there's new science that proves this. I tell people all the time, I am only the messenger. The science is showing that what I've thought for a long time is true, and that's why I'm sharing it with you. OCD, so compulsive behaviors that offset obsessive thoughts, and I'll share more about that with you. ADHD is up 800% between 1980 and 2007, and you know how much screen time use has gone up since 2007. That's the last longitudinal study that I've looked at, that I've seen. I look into the science frequently. 800%, which means it's up even more. Sensory overload. If you've ever been overwhelmed by sensory input, I'm going to share with you how electronics are contributing to that. Addictions, they're through the roof, and electronic screen time at the level of what it's doing to frequencies in the brain is partially a root cause, and then just accessibility via our screens is another issue. We'll talk about that. Social problems. So not only are kids not learning how to socialize appropriately because their heads are buried in their screens, there's also many inappropriate behaviors and just a decrease in socialization. We're going to look at that, and depression. So this is an ugly list. This list is not pretty. So that is why I'm here. I want to share that with you, and then I'm going to give you back control. So what do screens do to our brain? In one liner, and looking at this example of a brain map that I'm going to frame for you in just a second, screens are wiring and tiring our brains. So what does that mean? Just to frame this picture, because I think this is a brain map. This is a QEEG brain map, and I think it holds tremendous power. So what we're looking at is delta is extra slow speed in the brain. It's fatigue. It is inflammation. It's not pretty. What we want to see across this brain map is an all green brain, the green zone, as I call it. And I'm going to show you that in just a few minutes, how we get that. But when we see extra slow speed delta being used 3 levels too high, and that's what red means, that means that that brain is tired. It is fatigued. Then we see slow speed, which is also high, fatigue. Alpha is medium speed. It's where it's supposed to be. Then we see beta, fast speed, which is thinking speed or overdrive when it's being used too much. We see that is high. High beta, extra fast speed, which creates and perpetuates stress and anxiety, is through the roof too. That's what red means. 3 levels too high of extra slow speed and extra fast speed. Electronics contribute to a brain that is wired and tired. And this is a picture of what that looks like on a QEEG brain map, which a QEEG brain map is like an X-ray of your brain's performance. On this type of map, we want to see it all green, which means that your brain can get wherever it needs to go for optimal performance. So when we see double red and too slow and too fast, that's a wired and a tired brain. And I wish I could take credit for the term wired and tired, but I can't. It comes from a woman named Dr. Victoria Dunkley. I follow her, and she is a colleague in ours in this same, kind of fight to give back control to parents and to people who want to be able to control their brains. She calls it wired and tired. And she's also coined the term electronic screen syndrome, if you've ever heard of that. And she has a book on electronic screen syndrome, which is an awesome resource. And at the end of this presentation, this webinar, I'm going to give you some tips and some strategies on what you can do to offset and reverse screen time effects. And guess what she says? I'm not going to tell you this, but she says a total washout period. Take those screens away and get off your screens. And I know that's very difficult in today's day and age, and we're going to talk about it more, but washout is what she says. So a wired and a tired brain, if you just think about it, think about the time that you were the most stressed out and the most tired. Think about how you felt. That is what it creates. Excessive irritability. It leads to tantrums and outbursts. So if you have lovely little darlings like I have that love to play video games excessively and break our family screen time rules, which I'll share with you in just a few minutes, yes, some of them try to break it as often as possible. What happens is it ramps up the energy in their brain, and it wires the brain first and then tires the brain. And then when they come off, they're little monsters. And I'm sure if you have children, you've had some experience with that after excessive electronic use. And I'm going to show you why. Brain cells literally start firing excessively, creating this wired and then fatigued aspect. It can create fight or flight in the nervous system. So fight or flight is literally a system, after being in this wired and tired level up here, perceives things as attack. It's hypervigilant. It's looking for attack, so it finds attack. And it can cause fight or flight over something that shouldn't necessitate fight or flight. And then after a long time, fatigue sets in. So if you want a resource on a wired and tired brain, Victoria Dunkley is a great place to look. We're also hearing the term, and we're using this term more and more in our practice at Leigh Brain and Spine, digital dementia. And that term was coined a while back now, and if you look that up, that's basically the more time you spend in front of your screen, the dumber you're getting, the more demented your brain is, because it's slowing down, it's wired and tired, and our thinking skills are not as strong after we've been in front of a screen for a long time. So it's proven. Okay, sleep problems. So what happens with sleep? Sleep-wake cycle is disrupted when we've been in front of a screen for too long. So if you sit in front of your screen, especially late at night, and I know many people are guilty of watching Netflix or watching movies or TV, if you are in front of your screen until the minute that you try to go to sleep, you will be less successful. So thinking about what our brain does, and if you remember back to the brain map, we want our brains to shift into extra slow mode when we are asleep. But if our brain is also wired and it's using tons of extra fast speed, it's much more difficult for our brains to slow itself down, get into this calm mode, and shift into the sleep cycle of very slow speed. So it becomes very dysregulated from too much exposure to the blue light, but also from whatever content we're watching. So if you've heard me talk before, I'm going to give you some tips at the end about sleep, but we'll talk about sleep here too. You should try to turn off your screens. It's recommended 2 hours before bedtime, and that's what I tell people in the office, but I know that's not always something that people can do. It should at least be an hour. And truthfully speaking, when I get done working, which usually my cutoff time is 7 p.m., except for when I'm here with you all, 7 p.m., I no longer check my phone. I don't go on my phone. I don't check emails. I don't check messages. So if people probably notice this, if you text me after 7 p.m., I will not respond to you until the next morning because I start letting my brain come down. In my home, thankfully, it's bright and sunny right now. I don't know if you can see that instead of being dark because we're moving into summer. But in my home, as soon as the sun goes down, I put all the lighting low too to start melatonin production and to decrease cortisol, which contributes to stress production. And at the same time, I try to start reducing screens around the house too. And typically, we'll kind of hang out, my kids and I, or if we watch something, it's something really chill on our TV. Scientifically speaking, TVs have been found to be less offensive to the nervous system than phones or computer screens. So less blue light coming off of them. So I try to have our family convene, and we usually watch just a little bit of a movie because we really watch a lot of TV shows or things like that. Or if you've heard me talk about this before, I like to watch really boring shows. If you've ever seen Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee with Jerry Seinfeld, you're basically watching him drive around and coffee drip for about 20 minutes. And something like that is just completely perfect to start moving the nervous system in the right direction. And a lot of times we drink chamomile tea, and my older teenage kids like that too, and it helps their nervous system come down. We watch something really slow and not overly stimulating, not violent, not a million different screen time shots that are always changing, just pretty slow. And so we're producing melatonin because when you're in front of a screen, it suppresses melatonin. And melatonin production is what shifts us into sleep. It's a hormone. It's the sleep hormone. Shifts us into sleep, and it helps to invoke it and sustain it across the night. So I move sleep first because I really feel like everybody's sleep is being so disrupted because of being in front of a screen. So if you have no takeaways from this webinar, a number one thing that you should try to do is to get off your screens and not check your emails right before bed. Generally speaking, there's nothing that important. Turn your notifications off, and then that way you know there's none coming in. And we're going to talk more about that when it comes to addictions in just a second. Okay, OCD, compulsive behaviors. So if you are a person or if you have a child who has compulsive behaviors, that can even be the constant checking of messages, excessive texting, looking at Instagram, wanting to get back to your video game because you can't stop thinking about it, or your traditional OCD types of behaviors. That compulsion is feeding an obsessive thought in the brain. That is what OCD is. So I want you to be aware of that. And honestly, that is like a major red flag for me because I have what I consider to be a strong brain health program that I follow, like my life depends on it, because it does, because my brain depends on it. And if I remember, I'll try to share why with you as we get rolling. But I follow this program like my life depends on it. So if I find myself late at night feeling the need to check my phone, I know that my brain is wired and tired. So what that means is I go to bed early and I take things off my plate. And self-awareness is huge if you can gain enough self-awareness to realize when you're off and then have the strength to actually take actions to bring yourself back to a regulated state. It will keep you there forever. So checking my phone is one of those things. And thankfully, it very rarely happens. But what happens is the busier and the more tired and the more wired your brain gets, the more it feels the need to do these things, the more it will feel these compulsive behaviors to offset the wired and tiredness of your brain. So texting, if you're just randomly texting people at night, that could be a red flag to you, or any of these behaviors here. So think about that. OCD is up because of electronics, because people are doing this and they are not aware that this is bad for you. Checking your emails all the time is bad for you. It's dumping dopamine and serotonin into your brain. And if you've seen anything on this, you know, again, I'm just the messenger on the science. It's giving you little feel-good hormones every time you get a notification, even if it's just somebody trying to sell you something. That's why if you can get away from that, you can protect your brain and gain control back of your brain. Same thing with texting, you know, just all of these behaviors, like you feel the need to do it, then that means your brain needs to do it because it's wired and tired. Okay, moving on to ADHD. So ADHD, if someone has a brain pattern that is running in ADHD mode before we even worry about electronics, that brain is running slower than an optimal brain pattern. Again, proven by science. So what it means is, actually the biomarker for ADHD is excessive theta use, that's slow speed, and then not enough beta, perfect focus speed, use in the brain. So the brain is running slow in the first place. So then when you're in front of a screen, it's like electronic heroin for the brain. And if you know this, or maybe you don't, heroin is literally or cocaine is actually probably a better example, is one molecule away from stimulants that are used to offset ADHD symptoms. And so what that means is it's stimulating the brain and it's increasing the speed in the brain to offset the slowing. Electronics in the 60 hertz that are coming off of your screens are doing the same thing. So our screens in the United States resonate at the frequency of 60 hertz. Perfect processing speed for calm focus is around 12 to 15 hertz. The longer you sit in front of a screen, it's jacking up your brain from wherever it started. So if you have an optimal brain, you're starting in the 12 to 15 range. If you have a brain that has an ADHD pattern, you might be starting a little slower than that, like 7 hertz, 7 cycles per second. But the point is, the longer you're in front of that screen, it's wiring it closer to 60 hertz. It will attune, it will start resonating at the same frequency of the screen and eventually fatigue your brain. So it's giving the ADHD brain exactly what it feels like it needs, that constant stimulation, high rates of stimulation. And if we're just in front of a screen, it's coming from that fast 60 hertz frequency. If we're watching TV, then it also comes from very fast and large amount of screen changes. And there's been studies that have been done, and particularly when it comes to commercials, that commercials change screens very, very quickly, stimulating the brain, giving it exactly what it wants so that people will look up and engage with that commercial so they can be sold something. So a cool thing to do is watch shows from 25, 30 years ago, and you'll see it's like watching a play on the TV. Or if you watch an older movie, we watch White Christmas at Christmas time. It's like watching a play unfold on the TV screen. If you watch movies from today, that screen change is changing thousands of times, hundreds of thousands of times within a movie. Be aware of that because those screen changes are also creating high levels of constant stimulation for the brain. Okay, so then what happens is if an ADHD brain is in front of a screen getting all this stimulation that feels so great to it, giving it exactly what it needs, but not what is good for it. Then when you come off of all that stimulation, it has difficulty existing in the world that has much lower levels of stimulation. And again, that can contribute to children who have ADHD if they're in front of screens for a long time, and then they come off and they have all these terrible behaviors, tantrums, and they don't know what to do with themselves, and they can't engage in their homework, and their social behaviors are off. So regulate the use of electronics, and I'll show you how in just a few minutes. And I've already told you this, ADHD is dysregulated brain pattern. I already went over that. Okay, so we've already talked about many screenshots and changes. That can create sensory overload. So it can be fun watching that in a movie per se. So if you've watched an action movie and the screens move in a million times, screenshots are changing, very stimulating, but it also can create sensory overload. And I know for myself, probably because we have so much going on at all times, I try to keep my sensory input as low as possible. And deliberate as possible to soothe my nervous system into calm focus at all times. And we're going on vacation. So the Hubs and I are taking our family on vacation. We haven't gone on vacation in a super long time. We took the kids to the mall last night. And that is like just a difficult thing for me to do because first of all, I'm trying to help 5 school-age children shop. Not an easy thing to do in the first place. And I find the mall to be such a sensory overload place. There's always very loud music playing. And it's just a lot for my brain. It's not an environment I enjoy anymore. So to do that, I really set myself up to use some of my tactics to keep myself in a good place. And secondly, I barely ever go there, and we're kind of in and out. And my son Seamus said yesterday something about me being a mall mom and how I just drop kids off there. I don't really go in, and that's totally the way that I prefer it right now. So when we struggle with sensory overload, it's lots of high electrical energy in the brain. It's that extra fast speed, high beta that we saw back on that brain map. And when there's sensory overload, that's red and it's off the charts, meaning that sensory stimulation is not being processed in real time. There's hiccups in how it's being processed. So you might not necessarily react to it in the moment. So I don't have any mall meltdowns, right? But what happens to me is it really fatigues me. It starts to give me a headache, which is another thing that comes from a wired brain pattern. If you're using excessive fast speed, that's what creates headaches. And then it wipes me out. I'm always tired. So if I have to make a mall trip, I make sure they're quick. I usually take the fam for some food so I can chill and before I have to drive everybody home and do the rest of my life. And then I also usually take a little power nap when I get home so that I can decompress from the experience. So I don't react to it, but I'm affected by it. So recognize that. So if you have a child with sensory overload, recognize how electronics are contributing. By being in front of that electronic screen, it is making that electrical energy faster and hotter. So if they're in front of a screen for, hours a day, and a lot of schools are using screens for educational purposes now, which is a soapbox for a different day, but literally kids can be in front of screens for hours and hours a day. Then you go to do their homework with them at 6 p.m. and you have no idea why they just had a meltdown. But especially if they have this wired and tired brain pattern, it's contributing to these homework meltdowns at 6 p.m. Okay, so again, the consequences are difficulty existing in the real world that moves at a slower pace. Homework's the real world, it moves at a slower pace, so it can be difficult to engage. And the brain feels the need to shift back and forth through lots of items and activities. We really want to teach our kids not to multitask, and definitely not to multitask when it comes to screens. And I know talking with lots of families in the office, their teenage kids are using their computers or their iPads for homework, and they have 15, 20 tabs up while they have their phone next to them, while they're doing Snapchat and Instagram and texting. You need to reel all of that in during homework time, one tab at a time. And even for yourselves, again, that's another red flag for me. If I have 15 tabs open, generally something's off in my life because I'm a one-task person, and because brain research shows that's the best way to perform. Engage in the one thing you're doing, take a small break, and then start engaging in the next thing, not multitasking. When your brain shifts back and forth between activities and items and screens, it will feel the constancy for that intense stimulation. What we want for all of us is for our brains to feel good with lower levels of stimulation. And that's what we're talking about here, and trying to use our electronics to avoid getting overstimulated. Okay, addictions, just real quick. I already started to talk about this, but addictions are through the roof, again, proven by science. And back on the first slide, I didn't read the list of them, but it goes all the way back to just your general addictions with drugs and alcohol. Sex addictions are through the roof. They're calling it on the internet, of course, and my son wanted to remind me the irony of having a webinar about screen time effects. Yes, the irony is not, Seamus, my snarky little son, the irony is not lost on me. But yes, on the internet, they're calling porn and sex addiction the new drug because it's having similar effects on people who get addicted to the constant stimulation visually and auditorily using their electronic screens. It's producing very similar effects in the brain than a drug and alcohol addiction has been shown to create over historically. So there's lots of research coming out on that too. Checking our phones is a new addiction. Checking our texts, like I've already talked about. So it dumps dopamine into the system, serotonin, feel-good neuroreceptors, as we see here. Production goes up. You feel great about it while you're engaging with your electronics. You want to keep that at lower levels so it doesn't get away from you. And we'll keep it, and that goes the same for kids. So you'll see one of my tips and strategies that I want to share with you in just a few minutes is that you need to really control this for your kids, especially your teenage kids, and they are not going to like it. But you need to, so you can teach them how to balance this themselves, and you need to model that yourself. So our frontal lobes, which control social skills, but also our executive function skills, so which is like the captain who's running our ship, it does not develop until 28 years old in young men and 25 years old in young women. Women develop a little bit earlier than men. So when my kids say, "Why are you taking my phone?" when I've seen them do nothing but be on Instagram and they cannot leave their phone there for 5 minutes because they need to check Instagram, I will take their phone from them for a while until I see that go away, because I'm your frontal lobe, buddy. That's what I tell them. Your frontal lobe is not developed, so I'm your frontal lobe until you're an adult. So until then, I have to regulate these things for you if you show the inability to do it. And of course, I do it with a great deal of love. And they don't appreciate it in the moment, but honestly, even my older teenagers, my oldest is 16, 15, 14, they will say to me after the fact that, yeah, it was getting away from them, and then their behaviors will change. It's wild. It's really wild if you haven't experienced this. Behaviors will change. They'll stop being so edgy. They'll stop being angsty teenagers, like they call themselves. They'll be more pleasurable. They'll engage with our family more, and then they'll tell me they were feeling it, which is pretty cool. Okay, social skills, all proven by science, and I'm going to go a little bit faster so I don't run out of time. Decrease in eye contact, obviously, because for most of us are in our screens. Difficulty initiating conversation. Kids and even adults don't know how to start a conversation, nor do they know how to respond. Reciprocity in conversations is tricky. These are skills that you need to practice to master. If you have no practice in social skills, they do not develop as well. And there's studies down to 2 years of age showing that toddlers who use screens more have impaired development of social skills across their lifetimes because they start with their face in a screen. So this is big stuff. Small talk challenges, people don't know how to do it. Difficulty reading emotional expressions because they're not doing it with nonverbal cues. Decreased self-regulation. To me, this is one of the most important things. And you see it all the time now. If a kiddo is having a meltdown, or if he can't wait in a waiting room, and don't get me wrong, it's totally painful as an adult or as a parent to have to sit there with a kiddo who doesn't want to wait, then they're given electronics at a very early age to soothe themselves. But what that means is they did not have to soothe themselves by themselves. And, you know, I've been there in Target. I actually have a picture of the biggest meltdown ever. It's my youngest child, Trish Leigh, which I thought was pretty wild. Massive meltdown in Target. And she's 8 now, so it was probably like 5 years ago. Meltdown of epic proportions that I had to leave. And no, I didn't give her my phone. because she needs to learn how to be at Target for a few minutes with me, or I'm doomed. She will need the phone for the rest of her life to go to Target. So because I gave her options, I tried to help her regulate, she wasn't able to do it, and we left, and she was not happy. She didn't get to buy the toy that she wanted, which created more of a meltdown, but she learned, and she had to learn how to self-soothe. Kids are not doing that these days. And I have a fly, which is probably a good sign. So, and even us as adults, we'll self-soothe with our electronics. And again, that's a red flag. Detachment from others. So, you see it in a waiting room. People are plugged in instead of just chatting. Okay, so another thing that screens do to us, decrease in critical thinking and creativity. So this is proven too. If we don't use it, we lose it, or we never get it in the first place. So the next time that you're trying to think of something that you can't remember, do not ask Siri and do not ask Alexa. Keep thinking. Try to come up with it. In that trying to come up with the thing that you're trying to remember, you are moving your brain into calm focus. It's a workout for your brain. So I always do this, and yeah, it's painful, and I feel it in my brain, but I love it because it's like I'm trying to remember that actor's name who, starred in something, and I will think and think and think, and I won't be able to come up with it, but then I can, and that means that I just exercised that better brain pattern. And that's what I want you to do, because it's proven that we have decreased spatial skills because people are just following GPS instead of thinking about how to get where they're going. We have decreased improvisational skills because we just look things up and we're told how things go. Poor spelling, grammar, the whole lot. Everything you look up, you're getting worse at doing by yourself. So remember that, because we want strong critical thinking and cognitive skills as we grow older. Depression, new study of 2,500 kids, and that's a lot when it comes to scientific studies, shows that anxiety and depression increase with increased screen time for the reasons I just shared with you. And like I told you, it's video games, phones, and computers primarily. The brain gets caught in a negative feedback loop. It gets stuck, and it produces a negative brain pattern, which gets it negative behaviors, which gets it negative outcomes. So, and then kids are so sedentary that they're not offsetting screen time use. And I know I feel it myself because, again, the irony is not lost on me. I'm in front of a screen much of my day for work. I always get up and go outside and go for a run or a walk. I always get up and move. Every hour my iWatch taps me to get myself out of the chair, and I always do it. So I'm offsetting my screen time by not being sedentary, and so many kids are not doing that these days. And again, that's a soapbox for another day with no gym at school, and kids are just more sedentary overall. So you got to get your kids up and moving, and that's going to be a tip in just a second. So the important note is that if you already have one of the things that I listed, if you have sleep problems, if you have OCD, if you have depression or anxiety or ADHD, your brain is being affected by screens more than the optimal brain. Your starting point is different than the optimal brain pattern starting point, and it's going to produce more effects from screen time. And that's what I need people to know, so that it's more important that you regulate screen time, and it's more important that you reverse screen time effects. Okay, so this is the green zone. So 0 on the brain map is in the middle of levels away from optimal. So green is optimal and red is really overactive, like we've already talked about. So just to revisit, how do we reverse screen time effects? What do we need to do in the brain? We need to decrease delta, extra slow speed that creates tired, and we need to decrease the red and high beta that creates wired, stressy or anxiety feelings. Fatigue, tired, wired, stress and anxiety. We need to bring those down 3 levels if we're reversing screen time effects. Here's what we're going to do it. Moderation. And I know it's not rocket science, but it works. Moderation and consideration. I'm going to show you that in just a second. If you have any of the patterns that we talked about, then you really should have your brain mapped. Get an x-ray of brain performance so you know how your brain is performing in the first place. Or if you have a kiddo with behavior problems, you really need to do that so you understand the starting point. And I would be remiss if I didn't show you how neurofeedback worked. I'm going to show you one slide on how neurofeedback works to reverse screen time effects and to reverse all of the things that I've listed here on this PowerPoint. Something that you can download onto your computer immediately, and phones have it these days too, is switching the blue light to red light. And there's a free software program that's called Flux, F.Lux, and I have it on my computer screen right now, so it might look a little weird to you. And actually, I'll screw up my screen if I show you. It makes it more red light, which is less harmful. And I actually took my blue light filter glasses off right before I started, and I meant to keep them on. I always wear my blue light filter glasses when I'm working on my computer, not in front of other people. I sometimes do it in front of other people, but when you wear these glasses, it is reducing the blue light effects on your brain, keeping your brain from getting wired and tired. Okay, so let me just tell you in under 30 seconds what neurofeedback does to reverse screen time effects and to heal. And I know some people don't like that word, but that's how I feel about it because it's proven by science, to back out the patterns that create ADHD and anxiety and the others listed here. So what happens is, if you have those behaviors or if you're diagnosed with one of those diagnoses, then you know your brain is running in a mode that is creating the behaviors for you. So we'll just say ADHD, we know it's a brain that's running slow, it's a tired brain. If you have anxiety, it's a brain that's running fast. It's a wired brain. So what neurofeedback does is it teaches your brain to make more perfect processing speed in the middle, calm focus. And over time, it teaches your brain not to produce the wired and the tired effects. And it's proven by science that it changes the negative feedback loop that people are stuck in and creates a positive feedback loop for lasting change. But you'll see here, I also have that we always provide lifestyle change suggestions for people when they work with us in our office at Leigh Brain Spine, and all the neurofeedback experts that I work with are also equipped to provide those lifestyle changes for people also. And if you're interested, I offer a course on my website I'll share in a second. It's called Harness Your Brain, where you can learn how your brain works and all the things that you can do for a particular brain pattern to keep it at its healthiest version. And the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Psychological Association have deemed neurofeedback a #1 treatment for ADHD and the APA for anxiety and other mental health issues. Okay, moderation and consideration, and there's only 1 or 2 slides left. Limit your screen time use, and the American Academy of Pediatrics says to less than 2 hours a day. That's just a problem overall because many schools are using tablets. So be very conscientious and try to get a handle on how much time your kids are actually in front of screens or how much you're in front of screens. This is actually my screenshot from my screen time just before we started. You can see it says today at 6:53 p.m. And we're going on vacation. It's so funny that as I put this on here, I'm like, I feel the need to explain that I'm looking up a lot of things online, which obviously I don't, but my screen time use is up 31 minutes more so than average, and you can see that in the light blue. But isn't that so cool? 1 hour and 33 minutes it shows. Reading and reference for 22 minutes, other is 32 minutes, and it puts it into categories. And it's so funny because other is Amazon, because I was looking for some things that we need for our trip, which cracked me up. Productivity is email, social networking, which I don't do a lot of, is lower. So you can, if this is from the iPhone, if you have an iPhone and you don't look at this, it's a widget. So if you swipe to the right, you can see your screen time use, and you might have to set it up. If it's not set up, you can see today, you can see across the last 7 days. Super cool information. Look at your kids too. And you'll see at the end of this slide, we are having a screen-free week challenge for National Screen-Free Week, which is the last week in April to the beginning of May. You're supposed to go screen-free, but what we're doing is we're asking people, and we're trying to get people excited to take screenshots of their screen time, and that would be for next week, just a typical week. And then you send us that, and then during screen-free week, you try to use your phone less. And the person with the least amount or the greatest amount of decrease wins a pair of blue light glasses. So trying to make it fun for us to engage in less screen time during screen time free week. If you have a Google phone, it is called Digital Wellbeing. It's another It's not an app, but it's like a widget on the Google phone, which does the same thing. So get it set up, and it might be newer versions if you have an old phone. I'm not sure about that. Okay, so turn your phones off, decrease the lights in your home 1 hour before bedtime. If you can't limit screen time use to less than 2 hours a day, then what you need to do is try to moderate it and be very considerate about how you're using it. So like I shared with you, my brain health program, I get up from my screen once every hour when I'm prompted. I don't want to all the time, I will tell you. My watch taps me and I'm like, I'm in the middle of something. I finish that thing up at a natural point, and I always get up so that I can give my brain and my eyes a break. So be very considerate, and you can go for a 1-minute walk, or if you really can't get out of your chair, you take your eyes away from your screen. And if you see on my YouTube channel, if you have tapped into that, where I provide answers to questions, but I also give tips on how to control your brain, use open focus. Just look around your room for a few minutes. Listen to the air conditioner, listen to the traffic and the birds. Bring your focus out of your head, and it will decrease how wired and tired you are. On the weekends, in terms of screens, and it's difficult with kids, you want to have them use screens less than 2 hours at a time. My dear son Seamus, who loves Fortnite, tells me you can't get anywhere in 2 hours. Too bad. 2 hours it is, and then they have just as long of a break as they've been on. So, ideally it's like a half hour on, a half hour off, or an hour off. You want to have longer breaks than time on. It's not 2 hours on and a 15-minute break. That's not how it works. You want to be on an hour, off an hour, or longer. And what I do, and I've been doing it forever so the kids are used to it, they can have screen time on the weekends or when they're on break. Screen time, they have to engage in life in the morning, and then they can have a screen time for chill time, we call it. Then they have to engage in life again, and they can have more screen time in the afternoon or evening. Then they have to engage in life. So it's kind of 2 screen time use chunks or blocks, but broken up by lots of life. Okay, so this is an awesome tip, and then we're going to wrap it up, is that screens we know are bad for us, and just showed you all the ways that they're bad for you. And if any parents are out here that have listened to me in the office, you can make the screens work for you when you have children, and you can do it for yourself also. So I do this for myself, as silly as it is. It's all about the small wins. If I have reports to write, or if there's paperwork I need to do, then the Amazon trolling that I was looking for, I'm looking for a roof rack, won't be here in time for my Suburban to put all of our stuff in, then I can't do that until I've completed the task that I need to get done. So I've been incentivizing myself like that for so long that I'm able to crank through a lot of work, and then I'll spend 15 minutes trolling the internet for whatever thing that I need. Or a lot of times I want to look up articles on brain functioning or cool stuff like that, but I call it R&D. I won't engage in R&D until I get the work done that I need to get done. Same goes for your children. You can incentivize them, or scaffolding it's called. So if homework time is a bear, then they have to engage in homework for 10 minutes, and they can take a short screen time break, or 20 minutes, or a half hour, or something they would be successful at. You incentivize them with the privilege of their phone. So my children now, because we've been doing this since they're babies, know that their phones are privileges, and they have to get their business done and be responsible with their phone use, or they don't get the privilege of that phone. So if anything happens that their business is not taken care of, their privilege is revoked, which is very different from them being in trouble. The privilege is revoked, and they have to earn it back again. So that is behavior modification, using screen time as the incentive, and it is a privilege. It is not your child's phone. It is your phone that you let them use, and you have to remember that framework. It's very, very important. Okay, we're going to wrap up because I've been a college professor for a long time. Keeping people too long, not a good thing. I'm going to look and see if we have any questions, because I don't think we do. If anybody has a question, throw it out there. I'd be happy to answer. But if you'd like more information, tomorrow, and we'll send an email out tomorrow on my blog post. My blog posts are on my personal professional website, which is drtrishleigh.com. That's where I share strategies and tips and techniques on how to control your brain. And then technical information on our services are at Leigh Brain and Spine. So on Dr. Trish Leigh, they tend to be a little bit more fun, and it's not my licensed website, so I tend to share stories and try to make points there to help people out. Okay, so if there's no questions, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, because I know that time is a huge resource. I hope the information that I've provided for you, you have some takeaways that you can use tomorrow. And I really hope some of you will share your screen time screenshots with us for Screen-Free Week, so that we can be a little bit more successful gaining control of our brains through limiting our screen time use. Okay, if anybody has any questions and want to email me, you can email my office, or you can email me at info@drtrishleigh.com. And I hope you have an awesome night. Thank you very much.